Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this year I want to build as many different PCs as possible, varying in price and specification. I had planned on an entry-level gaming build today, but due to an issue with eBay and their magnificent click and collect team, I only just got those parts. So today I thought we'd start as cheap as possible with a £1 PC. Throwing all practicality and sensibility out of the window, I wanted to see what sort of super budget and likely terrible system we could come up with. So without further ado, here goes. Now this fella here is responsible for me blowing half the budget already. It's a certified repaired 500GB hard drive, and I bought it from a car boot sale for just 50p, under the impression that, and I quote, it might not work. Excellent start, but we'll see about that later on. I'm really into old Dell PCs at the moment, and I purchased one the other day for about £30, but that just wouldn't cut it for this sort of budget, so I had to improvise. These are the insides of a 15-year-old Dell Dimension desktop, and I was able to get them for nothing from a local PC breaker, because they had come from a faulty machine. Apparently these slots here don't work either. The problem with these boards is that they only fit a specific case, and the heatsink that came with it is designed to screw into said enclosure. Of course I don't have that, so a couple of nuts underneath the board are essential to attach this component. The fan though, well that just sits in this gap like so. I should have really built this inside because as I said we don't have a case, so I'll have to reassemble it all for testing. Before I move on, I should mention that this motherboard bundle came with two 1GB sticks of RAM and a processor that, to be honest, remained unknown until I got into Windows. The good thing about a PC breakers is that they usually have multiple amounts of the thing you're looking for, like this power supply. Again, like the motherboard, it looks a bit strange and is intended to be used specifically with a certain case. The good news is that after spending another 50p, it was mine. Now this person doesn't know me or know of the channel, so I get no special treatment price-wise. In fact, I'm told that a lot of these older parts just end up getting thrown away at the end of the month because they are essentially obsolete, and in a case like this where they only fit in certain enclosures, they attract very specific buyers, which are often few and far between. I was then given an ultimatum. I could have one of two graphics cards, and my decision was based on looks alone. Shallow, I know, but I chose the one that offered passive cooling because the quieter the better, right? That's how I ended up with this bad boy, an ATI something or other from the year 1500 BC. This would prove a little problematic later on. First, we had to put our new PC together, and as I did so I couldn't help but think we were just one case off reassembling an entire old Dell system. Still, not bad for the money. What a mess. In the interest of fairness, I'd like to disclose that I was allowed to take a couple of SATA cables too, so I didn't have to pay any extra for them. The first job involved turning it on, a task made more awkward by the lack of power switch, but shorting the motherboard pins with a screwdriver did the trick. Now I made the mistake of installing Windows 10 first of all, which meant that we couldn't install our graphics driver, as no drivers were actually available. Even Windows 7 had no specific drivers for this card, which by the way, turned out to be a Radeon X1300, but the Vista 64-bit ones worked just fine. All I know is that spec-wise we had just 256MB of memory to play with, and the card was released somewhere around the mid-2000s. According to Cinebench, we had a Core 2 Duo 6300 CPU, and as you can imagine the multi-core score wasn't brilliant, though the bottleneck was with the card. As we moved on to test a couple of games, I noticed MSI Afterburner wouldn't display the GPU usage for whatever reason, but I can say with 99% confidence that it would have been running at 100% usage most of, if not all of the time. Looking at this footage of San Andreas, and you'll notice some horrendous stutter, which I thought meant that our hard drive was indeed, busted. But because Windows had installed successfully and with reasonable speed at that, I was sure other factors were at play. Sure enough, I had another game installing in the background and the PC did not like this at all. I guess this process used up a good majority of our 2GB of memory. After that had finished though, well, I was glad to see things back to normal. So let's see what this thing can, or can't, really do. Now, as I'm sure you're probably aware, if you spend just £1 on a PC build, you're not exactly going to get stellar performance, and you can quite clearly see that here. This thing is definitely suited to older games, especially because of the graphics card's DirectX 9 limitation. If older games is your thing though, boy is this build for you. Now, not everyone's going to be able to get something for a similar price. It is just patience and a little bit of luck, but here GTA San Andreas ran fine, very high settings I might add, with 1024 by 768 resolution and an average frame rate of 45, very surprising. You can see the frame rate nicely evened itself out after we not only adjusted the resolution but waited for the PC to install something else in the background. Now, you'll have to forgive the very poor gameplay here, but I never did quite figure out how to play Tony Hawk games with a keyboard and mouse. Here, Tony Hawk's Underground, the original, runs with a very smooth and solid 60 frames per second most of the time. Again, I really don't know how you're supposed to play this without a controller, so the footage here is just me sort of skating around the old neighbourhood a little bit, falling off a couple of times as you would imagine, but I can safely say that the frame rate should remain steady throughout any level that you decide to play. And if you're into skating games, sports games in general, then Tony Hawk's Underground really is one of the best in the series, in my opinion. And it will run fine on an old £1 PC build such as this one. So that should be good to know for all of you Tony Hawk fans out there. The same can be said for the original Max Payne game. Now, 1080p resolution was used here, and we cranked the settings all the way up. Now, I can't quite remember, but I believe this game released in 2001 or 2002. I know the sequel came out the following year, but here, 60 frames per second all round. The game will run absolutely flawlessly on a system such as this one. The X1300 ATI GPU is certainly the bottleneck throughout today's testing. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get it to show up in the MSI Afterburner statistics in the top left corner, but unfortunately there wasn't even an option for the checkbox in the program itself. I don't know if it's because the card is DirectX 9, though I'm pretty sure I've tested it just fine on older cards before, so this is something I'll have to look into. As I said though, the frame rate is up there, the CPU usage is up there too, and I can assure you that the GPU was running at 100% usage throughout most of today. Now, when Half-Life 2 was released, it was certainly a game that could push older hardware to its limits. As you can see here, the CPU, both Core 1 and Core 2, are maxed out at 100%, and the game was virtually unplayable with the high or very high settings. Once we dropped things down to medium though, the frame rate shot up and we achieved more than 60 FPS on most occasions. There will be some drops here and there, as you would imagine, but this game, even today, still holds up pretty well, I believe, in terms of graphics, and it certainly was a revolutionary title at the time that's still well worth a play, even in 2019. I mean 2019. You know, you can get it on Steam pretty cheap these days, and I certainly think it's worth the investment, because it's probably one of the best games ever made. Now, I decided to be a little more daring with our final game tested today. This is of course the original BioShock, which released in 2007. I believe it's seen a remaster since then, though some would debate as to whether the remastered version of the game actually looks any better than the original. When you turn the settings way up, I think the lighting is a little bit different, but it's totally up to you as to what one you want to play. I can imagine the older game runs a little better because I think the physics effects are 30 frames per second as opposed to the newer game's 60, but all I can say is with this hardware setup here, we had to turn things down to 640 by 480 resolution and adjusted all of the graphics settings so that they were on low. BioShock is probably one of my favourite games of all time, and I can say that without even having played all the way through it. It should also run on pretty old hardware. In fact, I believe it made its way to iOS at one point. Whether it's still on the market or not, I don't know, but the graphics card is certainly the main factor holding us back here. A Core 2 Duo 6300 should still have no problem with a game like this. Just bear in mind that our graphics card couldn't quite cut it, though it will run on DirectX 9. That being said, there we have it. Today's build was not what I planned to do, and I'm sure it's not a video that you guys planned to see, but we built a PC that would run. It could run a few games too. Thank you as always. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know what the cheapest build you've ever put together is. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.